Warner Brothers has a problem. And no, the problem is not that people on the internet are mad at Supergirl. No, that happens on like Tuesdays. That is the air we breathe now. If a superhero movie exists, someone online is mad at it. Someone else is mad at their mad. And a third person is writing a variety profile about how brave everyone is for surviving the comment section. The problem is math. Because there's a number floating around right now that DC fans are celebrating. That number is $315 million. That is the number of people are calling the break-even point for Supergirl. And if that were the actual global box office target, then sure. Pop the champagne, put crypto on the poster, and tell James Gunn to start building the Hall of Justice out of recycled Twitter arguments. But that number is almost certainly not the real theatrical target. Because studios do not keep every dollar from the box office. Theaters take their cut. Marketing's not free. International revenue is not the same as domestic revenue. And when you actually start doing the math, the boring, ugly, unsexy math that tends to ruin fanboy victory laps, Supergirl, well, it's not going to need $315 million worldwide. It's going to need something closer to $600 million plus to truly get whole. And this movie is currently tracking for a domestic opening between $47 and $65 million, which means Warner Brothers may have looked at the second theatrical movie in James Gunn's brand new DCU, a movie that needs broad four-quadrant summer blockbuster appeal, and somehow let the press tour become a conversation about whether the audience is the problem. Because apparently Hollywood has learned nothing. Not from the Marvels, not from Snow White, not from the last 10 years of DC face planting into its own cape, and definitely not from the ancient entertainment industry proverb. Maybe don't pick a fight with the people you need to buy tickets. Let's roll the intro. Welcome back, fellow nerds, box office masochists, and anyone who saw the words Supergirl break-even math and thought, finally, a relaxing topic. For your returning subscribers, thank you, and you already know what this is. For the new people, this is The Critical Nerd, where we keep our expectations low and the receipts high and the calculator close enough to ruin a press release. And today we need to talk about Supergirl. Not because Millie Alcock gave one spicy interview, not because DC fans and DC critics are once again fighting like divorced parents at a Little League game. And not because I think one actress can single-handedly sink a $175 million superhero movie. That's too easy, too lazy, and frankly gives the press tour way too much credit. This video is about something bigger. It's about what happens when a studio is trying to launch the second major theatrical chapter of a brand new cinematic universe. And before the movie even opens, the conversation is already about tracking problems, budget confusion, culture war backlash, test screening rumors, and whether the lead actress Snow Whited the promotional campaign. That is not where Warner Brothers wants to be 3 weeks before release, because Supergirl does not have one problem, it has a math problem. It has a marketing problem, and it has a trust problem. And the worst part is this. Some of those problems were unavoidable, but the PR problem, that one, well, that was a choice. Let's start with the number everyone is fighting over. $315 million. That figure has been treated online as the supposed break-even point for Supergirl, and naturally the fan response split exactly how you'd expect. DC defenders said, "Oh, that's easy. Supergirl could do that." DC critics said, "That sounds suspiciously low." And everyone else said, "Wait, are we seriously doing superhero accounting again?" Yeah, we are. Because the studios keep making us do math in public. The reported production number floating around is roughly $175 million net before global prints and advertising. And the important words there are net and before. Net means incentives and tax credits have already been factored in. If the movie shot in the UK and took advantage of those production incentives, the gross production cost could be higher than the number being cited publicly. The studio reports the net after the rebate. That's normal. Before global prints and advertising means the marketing campaign is not included in that production number. And for a major DC theatrical release, global marketing is not pocket change. This is not some $12 million Blumhouse movie where the entire campaign is a creepy smile, a TikTok trend, and Jason Blum checking under the couch cushions. This is Supergirl. Warner Brothers is not releasing this thing with a Facebook ad and a dream. A reasonable marketing estimate for a global superhero tentpole is somewhere in the $100 million plus range, and some comps put that number closer to 125 or 130 million. So let's do the basic version. $175 million production, roughly $125 to $130 million in marketing. Now you're in the neighborhood of $300 to $315 million all in cost. But that's not the same thing as worldwide box office gross, because studios do not keep all the ticket money. In broad strokes, studios roughly, they keep half of domestic ticket sales and a little bit less overseas. The exact numbers vary by territory, deal, and release pattern, but the simple version is this. If a studio needs to net back $315 million, the global box office gross has to be much higher than $315 million. Really, some say 2 times, some say 2.5 times, but that is how you get to the scarier number, $600 million plus. Now, to be fair, because we do receipts here, not vibes with a ring light, there are public reports putting Supergirl's break-even closer to low to mid $400 million range. That may be using a different accounting model, factoring in post-theatrical revenue or treating the theatrical break-even differently, which is fine. Even if we use the friendlier number, Supergirl still's got a problem, because current tracking has the movie opening domestically between $47 and $65 million. And that is not a healthy launch for a $175 million plus DC tentpole with global marketing behind it. That is not the second brick in the new DCU foundation. That is, why does this brick have a medical bracelet? Now let's put that tracking range into context. At the low end, $47 million is basically the Marvels territory. And you never want your new superhero universe to be compared to the Marvels unless the sentence is, fortunately, we avoided everything that happened to the Marvels. The Marvels opened to about $46 million domestically and became the lowest grossing MCU movie ever. It wasn't just a box office disappointment. It became a symbol. It became the moment where casual audiences, trade press, and even some Marvel defenders finally had to admit the machine was not invincible anymore. Now, Supergirl, is it guaranteed to repeat that? Well, no. But if your movie needs broad mainstream adoption and the low-end domestic opening comp is the worst theatrical launch in Marvel history, maybe you do not schedule the parade just yet. At the high end, $65 million is better, but even that is not exactly a victory lap. Well, it's not even a victory lap territory. Let's be generous. Say Supergirl opens to $65 million domestic. Say it gets a solid 3 times domestic multiplier. That gets you about $195 million domestic. Now, if international matches domestic, you're around $390 million worldwide. That may be enough to clear some friendlier public break-even estimates, depending on how the accounting is structured, but it is nowhere near the harsher theatrical math that says this movie needs to gross somewhere in the $600 million range to fully recover production and marketing through box office returns. And the comparison to Superman makes the picture even sharper. James Gunn's Superman opened far bigger. It had the event film push. It had the new DCU starts here. It had the cultural curiosity. It was a foundation movie. Supergirl is supposed to prove that the new DCU can expand beyond Superman. And right now, it is tracking like a movie that may struggle to prove DC can sell the second character in the lineup without immediately falling back into the same old conversation. Is DC actually rebuilding? Or are we just watching a new coat of paint dry over the same cracked wall? Now, to be fair to Supergirl, not every problem here was created by the press tour. The release calendar is nasty. Supergirl opens on June 26th. That puts it right in the middle of the family audience traffic jam. 1 week earlier, Toy Story 5 opens. And say whatever you want about Disney's sequel addiction, and trust me, I've said plenty, Toy Story is still Toy Story. Parents know it, kids know it, grandparents know it. It has multi-generational awareness, premium format potential, built-in family appeal. Then 5 days after Supergirl, Minions 3 opens, which means Universal's little yellow cash goblins are coming for the same family wallets. And then 2 weeks later, Disney drops live-action Moana. So Supergirl's not opening in a vacuum. It is sandwiched between some of the biggest family-friendly brands on the calendar. That matters because superhero films are not automatically the default family event anymore. This is not 2018. You cannot just slap a cape on a poster and expect everyone to show up like they have a civic obligation to the multiverse. Superhero movies now have to earn urgency. They have to feel like events. They have to convince casual audiences that this one matters. And when your release window is this crowded, your marketing campaign cannot waste oxygen. You need every interview, every clip, every poster, every trailer, every TikTok, every late night appearance, every brand tie-in, every crypto plush, every fast food cup, every awkward press junket answer pushing the same message. This movie is fun. This movie is worth leaving the house. This movie is worth choosing over Pixar, Minions, and Maui. Instead, the campaign gave the internet a different message. Let's argue about the audience. Bold strategy there, Warner Brothers. Very brave and also possibly very expensive. Let's talk about Millie Alcock. And we're going to do this carefully because nuance is still legal in most states. Millie Alcock is a talented actress. The test screening chatter, even from people who are mixed on the movie, seems fairly consistent on one point. She's not the problem. A lot of the early noise has singled her out as one of the stronger parts of the film. So this is not a video saying Millie Alcock can't play Supergirl. That's not the argument. The argument is that Warner Brothers is selling a massively expensive 4-quadrant superhero movie, and the press cycle around its lead actress has become one more obstacle between the movie and the casual audience. In March, she made comments about existing as a woman in intense franchise spaces and how people feel ownership over women's bodies. On its own, it's not exactly shocking. A young actress talking about the ugliness of online commentary? That's not a scandal. That is basically a job requirement at this point. But the problem is what happened next. The press tour did not move away from the discourse. It moved toward it. By the time the Variety profile hit, the framing was not just, here's the new star of Supergirl. It was essentially, here's the punk rock superhero learning to ignore the trolls. And then came the line that lit the match. The criticism, she suggested, often comes from faceless accounts or people with names followed by things like Data 4, Christian, which she found hilarious. And she added that if you're pissing off the right people, you're doing okay. Now, in a smaller movie, maybe that is just a quote. In a streaming show, maybe that is a 2-day discourse cycle. In an indie drama, maybe it even helps. But in a $175 million plus superhero movie aimed at a broad audience, that's not just a quote. That is a marketing event. Because Data 4 Christian is not some tiny fringe demographic when you're releasing a summer superhero movie with a female lead, a dog sidekick, family appeal, and a brand that needs general audience turnout. Dads with Daughters are not a side quest. They are part of the target audience. Families are not optional. The casual audience is not optional. And when the press cycle starts telling a portion of that audience, directly or indirectly, you're the wrong kind of people, you had better be prepared for that to show up somewhere. Maybe not everywhere, maybe not instantly, but somewhere. And right now, the tracking is not exactly screaming, don't worry, they love the interview. And this is where the comparison gets uncomfortable because we've seen this version of this movie before. It was called Snow White. Now, before someone intentionally mishears the argument, no, I'm not saying Supergirl and Snow White are the same movie. One is a DC space western superhero film. The other was Disney spending hundreds of millions of dollars to remake one of the most iconic animated classics and somehow turning the marketing campaign into a hostage video for people who remembered 1937. But the pattern is similar. Expensive family-adjacent IP, a lead actress who becomes the center of the press cycle, comments that alienate or irritate part of the audience, a studio that does not course correct quickly enough, weakening public sentiment, then everyone acts shocked when the movie has to climb uphill with sandbags tied to its ankles. Rachel Zegler did not single-handedly sink Snow White. Let's be adults. That movie had many problems. The budget was massive. The visuals were controversial. The dwarves' discourse was a disaster. The remake itself had all the warmth of a committee meeting held under fluorescent lighting. But the press cycle mattered. It made the movie easier to root against. It gave critics a clean narrative. And it gave casual audiences one more reason to say, you know what, I'll just wait. That is the danger for Supergirl. Not that one comment destroys a movie. That's too simple. The danger is that the comment becomes the organizing story. And once that happens, your marketing campaign is no longer selling the movie. It's litigating the vibe. And if there's one thing Hollywood should have learned by now, it is this. You cannot litigate people into buying tickets. You can guilt them. You can scold them. You can call them names. You can write 10 profiles about how they are wrong, backwards, weird, toxic, unserious, or insufficiently evolved to appreciate the masterpiece being delivered to them by a publicly traded corporation. But at some point, those people either buy a ticket or they don't. And the box office does not care how morally correct the press campaign felt while losing money. Now, if the movie itself were tracking like an unstoppable crowd pleaser, maybe none of this would matter much. A great movie forgives a lot. Strong word of mouth can erase weak tracking. A killer opening weekend can make a messy interview look like noise. But Supergirl is not entering this window with a clean narrative. The production chatter has not exactly been confidence building. There have been reports and rumors around multiple test screenings, different edits, different endings, composer changes, mixed reactions, praise for Alcock, some interest around Lobo, but also concerns that the action does not fully land. The villain may not pop, and the movie has needed a lot of post-production attention. Now, test screenings are not automatically a death sentence. Studios test big movies all the time. Edits change, endings change, scores change. That's part of the process. But when a movie has extensive testing chatter and weak tracking and rough release calendar and a press cycle that keeps generating negative headlines, those things do not exist in isolation. They stack. One problem becomes two becomes four becomes a narrative. And the narrative around Supergirl right now is not DC's next great hero is coming. It is, how much does this thing actually need to make? Why is it tracking so low? Why are people mad at the actress? And what happens if Gunn's second DCU movie underperforms? That is not where you want to be. That is not a launch pad. That is a spreadsheet with a cape. Now, this is the part that matters beyond one movie. Because Supergirl is not just Supergirl. It is the second theatrical test of James Gunn's DCU. Superman was the foundation. Supergirl's supposed to prove the foundation could hold weight. That's a different assignment. A Superman movie can open on brand recognition alone. He is Superman. He's one of the most famous fictional characters on the planet. Even when DC is a mess, Superman gets a hearing. Supergirl has to work harder. She has awareness, yes, but she's not Superman. She's not Batman. She's not Wonder Woman. So if DC can sell Supergirl, that tells Warner Brothers the universe has elasticity. It tells them audiences are willing to follow this new DCU beyond the obvious icons. That matters for Clayface. That matters for Lanterns. That matters for the Authority. That matters for Brave and the Bold. That matters for whatever DC says the roadmap is this week before the next corporate merger, leadership shuffle, or earnings call makes everyone pretend the plan is always flexible. But if Supergirl opens soft and finishes soft, the question inside Warner Brothers, well, it changes. It's no longer what's the next chapter. It becomes how many of these chapters can we afford? There's the danger, because interconnected universes require momentum. The MCU did not become the MCU because every movie made $1 billion immediately. It became the MCU because each movie convinced the audience the next one mattered. That is the contract. You show up, we build. You keep showing up, we build bigger. But once the audience stops believing the next movie matters, the whole model starts breaking down. Marvel learned that the hard way. The Marvels did not just lose money, it damaged the narrative. It made every future Marvel product answer the question, is this another one of those? That is the box Warner Brothers cannot afford to put the new DCU into after only 2 theatrical releases. Because Gunn is not rebuilding from neutral. He's rebuilding from rubble. The DCEU did not end because audiences were overflowing with trust. It ended because the brand became chaotic, inconsistent, expensive, and exhausting. So when the new DCU starts producing the same old headlines, fan backlash, tracking concerns, budget confusion, franchise uncertainty, well, people notice. Not because they hate DC, because they remember DC, and that's worse. Now here is the contrarian part. Supergirl could still work. Seriously, it could. Tracking is not destiny. A strong final trailer could help. Reviews could help. Alcock could be great. Crypto could be a breakout. Lobo could give the movie some edge. The space western tone could separate it from the generic superhero sludge pile. Word of mouth could be better than the noise. There is a version of this where Supergirl opens on the high end, holds better than expected, plays as counter-programming after Toy Story, and gives DC a respectable win. But that version requires the movie to become the story again. Not the interview, not the backlash, not the fan war, not the spreadsheet, the movie. And that is where Warner Brothers has done itself no favors. Because when your movie has to overperform, you cannot afford self-inflicted wounds. You cannot afford to turn family buyers into discourse participants. You cannot afford to make the audience ask whether they are welcome before asking whether they want popcorn. There's the point. This is not about whether Millie Alcock is allowed to have opinions. Of course she is. This is not about whether every online critic is operating in good faith. Well, some of them aren't. This is not about whether every online critic is... This is not about pretending ugly comments toward women in franchise roles do not exist. They absolutely do. But Warner Brothers is not running a sociology seminar. It's selling a movie, a very expensive movie. And selling a movie means understanding the difference between being right in an interview and being effective in a campaign. Hollywood keeps confusing those two, and the box office keeps correcting them. So here's where we land. Supergirl is not doomed because one actress gave one interview. That's too simplistic. It is also not secretly fine because some fans found a $315 million number and decided that was the finish line. That's too convenient. The reality is uglier. The movie appears to have reported production cost around $175 million net before marketing. Once you add global advertising and factor in theatrical splits, the true box office target is much higher than the number of fans are celebrating. And depending on which model you use, the break-even conversation starts around the mid-400 millions and can climb towards 600 million plus if you're looking strictly at theatrical return against full costs. Meanwhile, the movie is tracking to 47 to 65 million domestic opening. It's not impossible, but it's not comfortable. It is opening into a brutal family movie corridor. It is carrying production noise baggage. It is following Superman, which had a much bigger launch and far more event urgency. And its press tour has spent too much time turning potential customers into debate targets. That is the problem. Not that Millie Alcock said one thing, not that some critics were mad, not that DC fans are coping. The problem is that Warner Brothers needed Supergirl to feel like the next exciting chapter in the DCU. Instead, 3 weeks out, it feels like a math problem wrapped in a PR seminar wearing a cape. Maybe the movie overcomes it. Maybe it doesn't. But if it misses, do not let anyone tell you the warning signs were not there. The tracking was there. The calendar was there. The budget math was there. The press cycle was there. The Snow White lesson was sitting right there in the middle of the road with hazard lights on, and Hollywood still somehow drove straight into it. Because at the end of the day, the audience does not owe Warner Brothers a cinematic universe. The audience does not owe James Gunn a roadmap. The audience does not owe DC a second chance. You earn that. One movie at a time, one campaign at a time, one ticket at a time. And right now, Supergirl needs a lot of tickets. Not arguments, tickets. And that is the part of the spreadsheet understands better than a press tour. So keep your expectations low and your receipts high. I'm the Critical Nerd, and I am out.